Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-in-Chief of The Washington Examiner. I'm joined for a political discussion today, as I usually am, by Byron York, our Chief Political Correspondent. If you're joining us on the Washington Examiner website, welcome. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe. The button is down about here if you have a look at your screen. We're glad to have you with us. Byron, I want to talk and I want to get your views on first of all, on a story or on a subject which is not really in the news, or perhaps I should say a person who's not really in the news, and that is our president, Joe Biden, the great disappearing president. There's reporting out there that he's hardly even phoning it in anymore. And he seems to have boarded the airplane for foreign parts after the shameful pardon of his son, Hunter Biden, and largely disappeared, not taking part in the Democrats' election defeat post-mortem. How do you read this? What's going on?
Well, the fact that he's not in the news is the news, because he's President of the United States, and he's going to remain President of the United States for 6 more weeks until January 20th. A lot has been going on in the world, not much of it good, and the President of the United States needs to be active in this. I think this really came home to everybody when Donald Trump went to Paris for the Notre Dame reopening.
What a nice group. Good man, this one.
And there was Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, and there was Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. They were there, and they were treating Trump like a head of state, a fellow head of state. And there was a meeting. Now, of course, I mean, Trump conducted foreign policy in that meeting. I mean, I don't know exactly what was said in it, but obviously Zelensky is looking at the man who's going to be the president of his greatest benefactor in a few weeks, and he's got to somehow deal with Donald Trump. So clearly Trump assumed the sort of mantle of leader of the free world there, which is all fine except, wait a minute, where's the President of the United States? And he was home resting up. And so I think since then, I think you've seen two things. I think you've seen Democrats who are just uncomfortable with this whole situation. They're not going to come out and criticize Joe Biden, but they're uncomfortable with it. And you've got Republicans who wish that Trump could be president sooner.
Well, the transition has taken place in a sort of psychological and political way, even though it hasn't taken place officially. And I'd like to turn to the transition and specifically to a couple of the nominations which appear to me to be going in opposite directions. And those are of Pete Hegseth for the Department of Defense, Tulsi Gabbard for the Directorate of National Intelligence. A week ago, Pete Hegseth's, the money markets had Pete Hegseth's chances of success at 12%, the betting market. It's now at 69%. There's been a revival for Pete Hegseth in the past week, and I think most people think he's probably going to get past. Talk a little bit about what he's been doing and how he's managed to affect this turnaround.
At the moment, they had Hegseth at 12%. They probably had Ron DeSantis way up there. For a moment, there was the float of DeSantis' name, and everybody said, oh, that's what's going to happen. What happened was, all the way up until a week ago, Hegseth had been the target of a lot of drip, 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 anonymous allegation journalism. About two things. About one, this incident in 2017 involving a woman who has anonymously accused him of raping her at that time, and then a number of instances in which he allegedly got drunk around 2015, 2016. And every single allegation was anonymous here. And at the same time, you had people who had worked with Hegseth at Fox News who said, you know, look, I went on the air with him at 6 in the morning, and believe me, if somebody's been drinking all night, you're going to know it. And that's not the case. It never happened. So you had defenders for him. And so I think what happened was the one person who was not speaking out at this time was Donald Trump, who was staying pretty quiet. All these allegations were coming. And then there was the float of Governor DeSantis' name, and you think maybe a big switcheroo is in the offing, just like it was when Matt Gaetz went out and Pam Bondi came in. And then Pete Hegseth essentially took control of his own nomination. I think he realized that if the nomination were to be saved, and I think that's the correct word for the way it was about a week ago, if it was going to be saved, he had to do it himself.
Right.
And I think the thing that really helped turn the tide was he did an interview a week ago Wednesday with Megyn Kelly.
So if you're in Iraq and Afghanistan in a combat zone, you're not allowed to drink. That's how I view this role as Secretary of Defense, is that I'm not going to have a drink at all. And it's not hard for me because it's not a problem for me. But I need to make sure the senators and the troops and President Trump and everybody else knows when you call me 24/7, you're getting fully dialed in, Pete.
And he told his own story. He addressed the allegations. And I think people got to see the Pete Hegseth they thought was there, but they weren't hearing him speaking. Since then, he's been very aggressive with media reports, and then a lot of Trump supporters have been very aggressive themselves on social media, especially being critical of Joni Ernst, the senator on the Armed Services Committee, who has been waffling about him. These days, Ernst is sounding more positive. She still has not come out and said, I will vote for Pete Hegseth. But she's sounding pretty positive, and it sounds to me like the nomination is in pretty good shape, even though, I mean, there's still going to be a lot of issues for the confirmation hearing. One, Democrats are going to bring up a lot of dirt if they can. But two, putting that aside, there's going to have to be the issue of, you know, the Pentagon is an $850 billion a yearly budget. There are 2-3 million people under your administrative purview. Have you ever run an organization that big? I mean, what's your experience for that? Those are entirely reasonable questions that still remain for this nomination.
Yeah, I think the point you make about him taking the initiative, taking control of his own nomination is a really big deal. That just the latest appears to be that he has put out on social media his acceptance letter to from West Point from years ago. I believe that there's some hit piece coming from that notoriously independent and neutral organization, ProPublica, and taking the initiative has been a big thing for him. But let's turn to Tulsi Gabbard. She's the only nominee other than Matt Gaetz, who we at the Examiner have officially said should not be approved. There are obvious questions about her views of the world and national security.
I stand in full support and wholeheartedly agree with the statements that President Trump has made.
But it is also now said that her interviews are not going well up with senators on Capitol Hill, that she's sort of relying on her attractive personality and is not well briefed. Is that what you're hearing? And am I right in thinking this nomination is getting on weaker and weaker ground? There
are certainly doubts about this one. Now, to connect what we just said, the new model, Hegseth has become kind of the new model for the troubled nomination, which is for the nominee to get out there, be personable, address the allegations, and in the process sort of dismiss the allegations. That hasn't happened as much with her. She hasn't had that Megyn Kelly interview where she addresses her earlier positions. On the other hand, it's been reported, I haven't reported it myself, but it's been reported that Donald Trump particularly likes the Gabbard and the RFK Jr. nomination because these are two Democrats.
Right.
These are people who were the walking embodiment of the broadness of the Trump coalition. These are people who were in the other party, and they said basically, my party abandoned me. I'm no longer a Democrat. I support Donald Trump. Well, that's a big deal politically for Donald Trump. So he does not want to see either one of these two go down. Right.
Well, I expect that. I expect there'll be a lot of questions relating for Kennedy as well. But we'll come back to that another time. That's all we have time for at the moment. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. And as I mentioned earlier on, if you're on YouTube, please like or subscribe the Washington Examiner. And thanks very much for joining us, and join us again next time.